I'd like to know how you're doing, how your family is doing, but more importantly, how you coping with this corona pandemic?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for having me. And good morning, or is it good afternoon?
Good.
Um, we are coping well. We are doing well as a family. We are scattered. My daughter is in Nairobi working, and I worry about that. Wish she was at home. My son is here with me, and we are sheltering in place like everyone and self-quarantining ourselves. A hard thing to do. And we are grateful for all that we have been given and that we can shelter in place when many people are unable to do that. And we are alive to the fact that so many people in our country are struggling and are not able to shelter in place like everyone else. Many people, the human community is struggling through this, and we are keeping everyone in our thoughts and in our minds and thinking, good for them and praying that this comes to pass so that we all move on with our lives. I struggle myself as an academic to shelter in place by academics by their very nature are people who are solitary, just like priests. We like our silence, we like just withdrawing to ourselves to work because academic rigor demands that we isolate and do our work. But the fact that now I'm forced to hide in the house has just done something into my mind that I want to go out because I've been told not to go out. And so I miss my friends. I miss having that human touch. I miss my neighbors and, just having a good laugh and living life, the way I'm used to. So I struggle with that. But I understand and I speak to people in my village and in my country about social distancing. It's a very foreign concept to all of us. It's anti who we are as African people who are social and we socialize, we go to church, we go to weddings, we go to funerals, and I just have a happy life, enjoy our lives. And now we can't do that. And I think that is bringing in its own complexities of depression. People feel isolated, people feel alone, and it's not a very comfortable feeling for most of us. However, this is the reality we find ourselves in. So we just have to do with that, however difficult it is. Um, I worry about in the impact of this isolation on mental health and emotional health for most people. Um, I personally think I have the tools to work through that. I know many people don't have those tools to work through that, and I worry that the government has never invested in mental health in this country, which I think is going to explode after coronavirus. So that's what I can say, but I also want to know how you are doing with your family.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thanks for asking. I'm fine. My wife and I are fine. We find ourselves in a space of lament. As the writer Tejukol says, sitting in the dark. So we're using this space to not really to articulate a kind of soapy, hopey stuff that we're seeing around with many religious spaces, but
Right.
to find a melancholy hope, if you may,
Right.
to try and ask the questions and as a space for lamenting. But just like you, we're prayerfully hoping and waiting waiting this thing out, that it'll come to pass sooner rather than later, so that we may go back to our lives. Yeah, like you, I also miss going to work. Interestingly, yeah. So, but nonetheless, we're keeping well. We're keeping well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So thanks for that. I just want us to just get started. And I mean, the last couple of weeks, we have seen religion being at the epicenter of COVID-19. And we've seen in spaces like South Korea with patient zero. We've seen with Iran, Nigeria, Washington, D.C. We saw it in Malaysia. and even here in Kenya with, with just the ongoings of what's happening. And I'd like you to just quickly give the audience a general overview of how COVID-19 has and is impacting organized religion globally.
Right. Thank you. That's a very interesting question, and it's been a question that has been in my mind for since this whole nightmare befell us. And let me just begin by saying that coronavirus has impacted all our lives in so many ways, so many unprecedented ways. It actually took everyone by storm. I don't think there's government that was ready for this. Religious leaders were not ready for it. Humanity was not ready for this. And I don't think there is any aspect of our lives that has not been touched by coronavirus. If you think about our economic life, our political life, our social life, our spiritual lives, it's been turned upside down by this pandemic. And you can see that our politicians have withdrawn into their cocoons, their spaces. Our religious leaders are nowhere to be seen. Everyone has withdrawn, and that tells you that everyone is scared for their lives, because everyone now realizes that human life is extremely fragile. It doesn't matter whether you're a pastor, it doesn't matter whether you have power or money, all of us are really in a very fragile time in our lives, and we are scared. We are worried for our families. We are worried for our friends. We are worried about loss of jobs and livelihoods. So everyone is in that situation. So I see a social collapse already. Even before we get to religion, I see a social collapse. Our social lives are upside down. I can't hug my children if I want to. I can't hug my neighbors. And there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of anxiety. But I think for me, the hardest thing is the loss of life. It is painful to think about the numbers, to think about the fact that we cannot even have rituals that help us to make sense of death, like simply burying your loved ones. I think it's a very difficult thing. And burying loved ones is a spiritual exercise, not just for the dead, but also for the living. And so my thoughts are with the many families that have lost their loved ones. Having said that, let me just say that the fast moving nature of this pandemic caught religious leaders and religious organizations the world over by storm. None of them ever foresaw a time like this. And and I think while the pandemic, just because of its fast evolving nature, it's hard to pin a finger and say this is its impact. Just a casual glance of what's happening in life can tell you already what that impact is. But globally, it has affected religious organizations. It has already impacted on congregational worship. We don't go to church anymore. People are not going to mosques. People are not going to temples. The Roman Catholic March at the Holy St. Peter's Basilica Square is closed. It's not streaming live like it's been the tradition for like centuries. The Muslim holy sites, actually the pilgrimage to Mecca, has been cancelled because of Corona. The holy sites in Jerusalem are operating minimally, and some of those things sit at what it means to be religious in this world. Of course, the mega churches and the small churches have all closed their doors. And now many have resorted to streaming that live. And the other thing is that we have lost a lot of religious people. In Italy alone, scores of priests and nuns are dead. And I think it's extremely hard for people to imagine just the sheer magnitude of that. But what that tells us is that coronavirus is no respecter of anything. It's not a respecter of class. It's not a respecter of religious personages. A pastor would die of coronavirus like a poor person on the street would die. It doesn't mean you don't have faith. It just means that this is a disease. Disease affects humanity. It doesn't matter your class. And you can see everyone is hiding now, even the powerful, even, not just the politically powerful, but also the spiritually powerful. Everyone is in hiding because we are afraid of that. So it has had a global impact, and of course you remember that coronavirus has been linked to religious organizations, like in Korea, in France, in America, particularly in New York, in Iran. Religious gatherings have been the vector of the virus, and so it has necessitated governments to force religious organizations to close services and to social distance, because the virus thrives in huge groups. And you're seeing guidelines, coming up from various governments to make sure that people are sheltering in place and people are not getting into, churches, because it's dangerous, not just for themselves, but also for the others. Because the thing about this is that if you went to church today and there are 5,000 people and you go back to your families, it has a multiplier effect on, on so many levels. And so that, in my opinion, is the general impact of the virus already on religious institutions globally.
Thanks for that. I think moving this conversation closer home, coronavirus, in your view, what has it revealed about religion and religious activities here in Kenya?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So again, coronavirus took the Kenyan religious leadership by storm. I remember I had just traveled to Rwanda, and when I came back, there was a lot of noise that the Kenyan government was not doing anything about that. And they were bolted into action. And the first thing they did was to minimize large meetings and large organizations. But the religious clergy were not prepared for that. I don't even think they ever imagined that such a thing would happen. But what this revealed to me about the status of not just religious clergy, but also our entire leadership, is that it revealed a leadership and institutions that are not prepared for 21st century challenges. Corona is just one challenge. We have had a lot of challenges. Climate change is a big, challenge. And actually there is research that links coronavirus to climate change and science, and all these things. But religious leaders have always been at the forefront denying this or not supporting that. And we've seen that in America. And, so it revealed the underbelly of religious organizations. They are totally unprepared for 21st century challenges. The other thing is that it revealed a sort of a selfishness. You remember immediately the government was scrambling to come up with the sort of directives on how to prepare the country and how to mitigate this. The first thing that religious did was sort of force their members to attend churches. That Sunday, I remember very clearly, I made a drive around to see what's going on. And churches in Nakuru, where I live, were full to the brink. And it scared me that the only thing they were doing was, at the entrance, people were given water to wash their hands. And that was not enough. In fact, washing hands is okay, but religious gatherings are more dangerous than, not washing your hands. And we saw also the other response was that they started crying victimhood. When there was a public outcry, right, and people on social media were calling them, to account and demanding that they, suspend church services, immediately they withdrew into the victimhood mentality, a sort of a persecution of the church. Only that this was not a persecution. This was a necessity for everyone's sake, including their own lives. So it also, revealed very interesting tensions about that every time there's a problem in the Kenyan church, the first thing they think about is victimhood. We are being persecuted as religious leaders. This is a country that does not value religious clergy. And I thought that was selfish, because it's not about religious clergy, it's about people. And so what that revealed to me is that we have a people-centered clergy that is centered on their own personal survival vis-a-vis that of the survival of their members and the welfare of their members. But if you thought clergy were a problem, you would be shocked that many Kenyan Christians demanded that they go to church. And that was a shocker for me, because when I look at it, Kenyan people are highly educated, but also highly aware of global phenomena. I'll tell you one thing. When I lived in America, I would get breaking news from Kenya before I woke up. They knew what was happening in the rest of the world. Many times I would just wake up and the first thing I learned about America was from Kenya. Of course, there is a time difference, but also that tells you that Kenyans are very well informed. But for them to see the happenings in Korea, the happenings in Iran and Italy, and still insist that they want to go to church, it was a shocker for me. So it's not just it didn't just reveal about religious leaders. It also reveals something about ourselves as a Christian people. And the other thing that it revealed was, immediately people began to think about this virus in terms of the language of demons, that this is a demonic attack. And, of course, I was shocked as an academic. I was shocked, and I was not shocked, because I also know that this is a country where spiritual solutions are applied to issues that are absolutely non-spiritual. And it starts with the government. The government immediately called for a national prayer day to pray about this virus. And I felt like, oh my God, we are back to that again. We have never learned any lessons. That the first line of defense for the government was to call religious prayers instead of going straight to think about our hospitals. We can pray. Nothing wrong with prayer. I'm a Christian. I pray, and it's good for people to pray. It's good for clergy to give people hope. But can we also think about tangible ways of mitigating this? So I felt that really kind of surprised me, and not surprised me at the same time, because that's what we always do as a country. And I thought one of the things that for me that prayer does is that it takes away our focus on our government. It takes away our focus from questioning, why are our hospitals run down? Why don't we have equipments? Why don't we have doctors? Why don't we pay our doctors? Those are the things that went through my mind. The other thing that it revealed is the ignorance, the sheer ignorance of some of our clergy, not all, some of our clergy. Think about Apostle James Maina Ng'ang'a, his condescending attitude and mockery of coronavirus, and his desire, to carry his guitar to go to Rome and pray if the government allowed him to go and pray for coronavirus. Just the fact that, he makes this a mockery, it's so condescending. and absolutely out of touch with what's happening. But also the fact that he doesn't even empathize with families who have lost loved ones. I mean, there was just that lack of humanity at that moment for me. And I felt very frustrated. The other thing is that was also shocking was the first response was we need to pray for this virus. We need to miracles, the miracle industry. Uh, People want to pray and wish away a virus. Of course, Bishop T.B. Joshua, of course, prophesied and said on the 27th of March, coronavirus will be gone. And coronavirus is here with us. People are continuing to die. So it revealed a clergy, a church that is still really thinking about spiritual solutions to very dangerous, challenges and situations like coronavirus. And I'm not opposed to prayer. I think prayer is awesome. I just think that it shouldn't be the only way as a country that we think of solutions.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. But I mean, some of the things that you've mentioned, the over indulgence on matters, spiritual, which is very bizarre, if you may. And some of the things are talking about how the self-centeredness of clergy, but also even the bizarre and absurd nature in which religious followers sometimes follow some of this doctrine. I think lays a bigger question here, because these are not things that are not coming to the fore now. People have been discussing them for a while now. So I wonder about the history of this violent theology, as you've called it before. And where did it come from? Is it something that came 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Has it been with the advent of Christianity here in Kenya? Like this kind of pervasive, almost very violent theology and doctrine. Where did it come? What's its history?
So I could trace that to right after, I could trace that to 3 epochal periods in history. And time does not allow me to give a deeper analysis of that, but I'll talk about 3 stages of this. I think the first stage is, of course, colonial Christianity, or what we call mission Christianity. In my opinion, Christianity, as we know today, as it were, is a colonial project. It came with colonialists, and I really don't differentiate myself colonialism from Christianity. Both of them are, two sides of the same coin. Everything that came with colonialism, including church and education, came with an intent of educating and civilizing Africans, the natives, the pagans, the uncivilized, people who have no mannerism. And when I will leave Wendy and Andrea to talk about education, let me talk about religion. The fact that upon arrival, that missionaries felt that our very culture was backward is, to me, the beginning of violent theologies. There was an assault immediately on our cultures, on our languages, on our spiritualities, on our religiosities, and that led to the collapse of our social institutions, collapse of our political institutions prior to colonialism. The fact that someone's language or someone's culture was thought to be backward, some people still think that way to date. So to me, the first violence that I think I notice is a violence against who we are as a people, about our culture, about our traditions. And you remember the missionaries, fighting female genital mutilation, and the Kikuyu Presbyterian Church, the Kikuyu independent churches, breaking away from that because they were fighting our culture and they didn't like it. Okay, make no mistake, I am no supporter of female genital mutilation, but just the very first assault of our culture was to make us feel that what we have always been doing, what we know as our cultural worldview, was assaulted from the very beginning by missionary Christianity. And that led to a crisis, a cultural crisis, identity crisis, social crisis that we see to date. For example, I think I can give an example of the status of the African family. Today, and there's data, there's literature to support that colonialism and missionary Christianity assaulted our social institution, particularly our marriage institution. And today, the sort of violence that we see against women, against children, is directly tied to the assault of the African family. The fact that we no longer have societies that are caring, our very foundation as African societies are welfare-based. We cared about the aged, we cared about the frail, we cared about the elderly, we cared about the sick, we cared about children, we loved children, we cared about women. The fact that, you know, polygamy was demonized, and in its place, monogamy now became the ideal family. And we embraced that as people who never question the genesis of this. We see that today. And I'll talk about that later. I can directly, attribute the assault of our culture to the loss of identity we feel today as African people. Of course, there is a decolonization project that is going on, particularly in South Africa, where the apartheid era seriously impacted Black people in ways that we could never imagine. And then after that, you see a second wave of Christianity, and that is the African instituted churches. The best example I can give is Stefani Legio Maria, coming after missionary Christianity, trying to reclaim our culture, our traditions. And many people embraced that because it was an African expression of Christianity. Africans who are trying to be Christians in their own terms, in their own culture, and they were resisting the assault on our culture. But of course, the African instituted churches were swallowed by the new Pentecostal churches. Of course, not swallowed, but they were minimized. And now we have this wave that started in the 1970s of the emergence of Pentecostalism with the structural adjustment programs. And, the pastor emerged as, a new source of authority. And that's why, if you look at history, from the 1980s, the 90s, and 2000, we started seeing these mega pastors, who are very powerful and, both spiritually and politically. But that was the time we also began to see the emergence of very toxic, violent theologies of demon possession, deliverance theologies of women's bodies. It's linked to the fact that our healthcare system is dead completely. There's a collapse of that. And so people are sick and they go to church, for recourse for their pain, because the pastor tells them that they'll be healed, they'll be prayed for. And so we had a sort of a marketplace, a free marketplace of churches that just emerged. And the government was asleep. It's still asleep today. There's no regulation for that. Anybody with a Bible and a microphone can start a church. And so the faith healing industry, the prosperity gospel, which I consider a violence in its own. It violates people's economics. It violates. It robs people of their money, and so it's a whole. I could write about this forever. There's just so much angles to that kind of violent theology. But let me say that it is that period that gave us the likes of David Owor, the likes of Victor Kanyari, the likes of Nganga, the likes of Gilbert Dare, and so many others. That is not to say that we don't have decent clergy. We do. We have a lot of decent clergy in this country. We have a lot of people in this country, men and women of God, who care about people. But the majority of these clergy are in the faith and prosperity gospel that continues to assault people's beliefs and pockets and money. I know people who've sold land to give money to the pastor to build a house or to buy a car. So this has a long history, and I could only just give those three epochal times in history very briefly as how we began to find ourselves where we are today. And that's why history is important. It tells us where we came from. We are able to understand the future from where we have come from.
I think that's thanks for that very, very insightful answer. And my question to you is that I get the idea, the idea that religion in these kind of spaces can become violent, and you'd have very many people, particularly who are poor, going into these kind of churches. They're desperate, etc. But what I find strange is that equally that we have also seen very, very many educated people buying into these false theologies and doctrines. Would you unpack that for me?
Yes, it is something that is in my mind every day. First of all, let me just say that it's interesting to me that educated people go to Nganga's church. It is also interesting to me that an educated clergy like Prophet David Owor, who is a PhD holder, preaches a gospel of miracles for a man who spent half of his life in the labs trying to create cures for serious diseases. Professor Eileen Baker, a well-celebrated professor of sociology and religious studies, has questioned this in her study of In the Making of the Moonies. That is the title of her book. Reverend Moon, the late Reverend Moon, was the founder of this huge sort of cultish church in South Korea, which, just did not appeal to anybody's mind. But the fact that he had so many, followers made Professor Eileen Baker to try to understand and unpack this. And it's a complexity of issues. I have a number of theories to explain why a huge cache of educated people are followers of the likes of Nganga, the likes of Apostle, the likes of David Owor. My friend, Professor Ebenezer Obadiri of the University of Kansas State University, has written a book titled The Pentecostal Republic, in reference to Nigeria, which is, I think, the mother of Pentecostal Christianity, the center, the locus of Pentecostal Christianity anywhere in Africa. And Obadiri, who, a sociologist and a historian, writes about this and connects it again to the structural adjustment programs, and says that the structural adjustment programs impoverished African nations a great deal. But more importantly, it impoverished the academy. Of course, one of the direct effects of the structural adjustment programs is not just the collapse of our healthcare in nearly the entire of the African continent, but also the total decline of the academy, the African academy to date. We haven't recovered that. And so, and people left. There was a brain drain because of SAPS, but also because of later dictators who would not allow people to hold them accountable. And so people left. And that immediately continued to delegitimize the African academy as centers of knowledge creation and knowledge production, as places of epistemological conversations. And what happened is that because the African academy was deprived of that academic rigor, we see the pastor emerging. Don't forget that SAPS and Pentecostal Christianity emerged at the same time. We see Pentecostal clergy emerging and taking up that space. And as academics left for consultancies and to the booming NGO sector, Pentecostal clergy became the beneficiaries, of this situation. And and the pastor, occupied that space. There was a sort of a reorganization of power, so power moved from the academy to Pentecostal churches, and the pastor occupies that space. And he is a jack of all sorts of things. He is a spiritual advisor to the presidents of countries. He is he is a healer, a faith healer, a miracle performer. He is a prophet to the nation. He's an all-star celebrity. He's a fashion icon. He is he gives tips on finance and business, because they run churches as businesses. In fact, churches are empires, business empires. And so he became this person who is admired, and his lifestyle itself is only the kind of lifestyle that a university professor can envy. The vehicles they drive, the neighborhood they live in, is something that I personally, as a professor, just admires from far. I could never live that kind of life. And so, according to Professor Obadiri Ebenezer, this is the reason why the African intelligentsia, intellectual community, is attracted to this pastor. He personifies all that we are not. And people may disagree with that, but I think it is not far-fetched. Just look at what is happening in our situation. As academics, we have retreated into our homes. And who are occupying the public sphere? It is the clergy, it is the politicians. The academics have retreated, particularly in the African continent. In other parts of the world, it's a different story altogether. But that's not just the reason. The other reason is that in Africa, we live in a very fragile environment, in a very precarious environment. And my friend, Professor Kim Knebe from the Netherlands, just documented that in Nigeria, saying that one of the reasons that people, academics, or just really professionals and the lay people and the poor are attracted to these churches is because of the vulnerabilities that we struggle with. Our healthcare is dead, our education is in a bad state, our countries and infrastructure are run badly, there's just bad governance everywhere. And so the only safe spaces for people to retreat to are to such churches where they find solace, where they find prayer, where they are able to have sort of a religious language to make sense of what they are going through. So Kim Nibe and many other sociologists of religions, including myself, think that the very fragile African environment has been responsible for that. And pastors have taken advantage of our vulnerabilities, of our fragile environment, of our precarious existence, where we are just really living one day at a time, if I may use that language of Pentecostals, that it's one day at a time. It's like we cannot plan a future. You are thinking about only today because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. And that is a Pentecostal language, to give you hope for the next future. For tomorrow, sorry. And the sheer level of poverty, the sheer level of disease, the sick, there are so many people who are struggling with ill health, people who are struggling with food security, people who are struggling with school fees for their children. And they all want to find, a space like church where they reimagine a new future that works for them. And unfortunately, religious leaders have taken advantage of our gullibility, our vulnerabilities, and have, created, a sort of a situation where we are so dependent on them. But lastly, I will never, I will think about there is an element of brainwashing that takes place. Scholars think we are not conclusive about brainwashing, but Aileen Baker thinks that brainwashing is real. How we, and I think sometimes of, let me make use of the example of Prophet of War, a highly educated man with over 90% of his members being extremely poor and vulnerable. And the fanaticism around him from these people, the fact that you cannot critique or war and have just a sustained conversation with his followers, the militarism of his followers, the fear that he has captivated his followers with, makes me really think about brainwashing as a possibility. But it's not all bad. There's also the fact that religion offers us a language, a religious language, to try to unpack the things that we can't understand. And that's the beauty of religion, not just the hope, but it gives us the language to understand our situations.
Wow, that's quite elaborate. My final question, I mean, I like how you've ended your last part, saying that religion is not all bad, that it provides for us a language and a context to articulate our lived daily experiences. You remind me of the scholar Camille Paglia, and she says that religion is a bedrock of civilizations. So
Right.
now allow me to ask you to dream with me, and if for instance we would articulate and envision a religion and a theology of human flourishing that is sustainable, but also that provides building blocks for prosperity of Africans. How would that look like in your view?
Thank you. In the last few years, I've really been thinking about the whole concept of human flourishing, particularly when I look at the suffering around our lives, our neighbors, the vulnerable. I keep thinking about if there is a theology of human flourishing for people like that who also bear the image of God. But this week particularly has been very hard for me, with the passing of Archbishop Ndingi Mwana Anzeki, whom I felt was like the architect of not just a social gospel, but I think in every sense of the word, him and his Ike, the Reverend Timothy Njoya, the late Reverend Gitari, the late Timothy, the late Alexander Muge, Zacchaeus Okoth. I think about people who had a vision for human flourishing for Kenyans and for the African continent. So this has been a very hard week just for me to think about the caliber of leaders that we had. And I think Kenya, and I stand to be corrected, I think Kenya was so much better, or Kenyans felt so much better having a clergy that fought for them, compared to the kind of clergy that we have today that doesn't think about these issues that are important to us. The concept of human flourishing is actually a concept borrowed from philosophy and religion, and I'm glad that you are a philosopher. Every time I have a conversation with you, I can tell immediately, even before you told me you are a philosopher, I knew you are a philosopher. So it's an idea that encompasses all of human activity and goals. I do not know anybody who is alive who doesn't think about their own personal welfare and how they can escape their current situation to a better place. It's about human beings thriving, to flourish in their lives, to have food security, to have a roof over their head, to be happy, to be able to send their children to school, to be able, to have money for food and their bills, to be able to be happy, because sometimes people think about happiness in terms of economic terms, but human flourishing is sits at the heart. at the center of who we are as human beings. What do we want? And sometimes it's not just that we want economic things. We just want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to have good relationships. We want to laugh. We want to be human, And so to me, the idea of human flourishing is not just about myself, but also about, corporately, as one, so that if I am happy as a Kenyan, I want everybody around me to be happy. We want to be able to be happy all as a Kenyan community. So when I think of human flourishing, I think about wholesomeness. I think about a wholesome theology that does not think about me only as a spiritual person, but thinks about what is it that makes me human. Of course, spirituality sits at the heart of what makes me human, but also I have physical needs, I have economic needs, I have social needs, I have political needs. What we have seen in this country is that Christian churches, particularly, I will not talk about other religions because I have no specialization there, is that it thinks about the spiritual part of human beings and completely neglects the other parts of the human being that makes that person whole. And I think about Martin Luther King saying that if your theology does not think about the poor, people living in the slums, people who have no food. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing that. I don't remember the quotation exactly. I can't quote him verbatim like that, but he was talking about a theology that talks about everything that makes us human. And it's not just about Jesus Christ. It's not just about going to heaven. It's not just about going to church. It's about how am I living my life here and now. It is otherworldly. It's not about a world to come. It's about the world that we live in currently, because we are all here. And we want to have a better life here, not wait to go and have it in heaven. That is the theology that has been very rampant in Christianity in Kenya, particularly, that the poor are always told about the mansions in heaven, and nobody is thinking about the slums that they live in. The majority of the Christian poor live in slums. And it is shocking to me, Joe, if I may say this, that in a place like Kibra, where we should be thinking about water and sanitation and drainage and and schools and food and proper and decent housing, there are more churches in Kibera than there are toilets. Just think about that for a moment, that there are more churches in Kibera than there are toilets. And right now, in the age of Corona, we need more toilets. We need a working drainage. We need people living a decent life so that they can self-isolate. We need people who are able to wash their hands because they have clean water. So when I think about a theology of human flourishing, I think about a wholesome theology, that takes care of my person, my spirituality, my humanity, but also my physical needs and wants. And I don't see that. Let me give you an example as I wind up. I don't see right now any church, and I because I'm self-isolating, I probably have not seen anything like that. Maybe they're there. I haven't seen any church clergy bolting into action and saying, my people need food, they need medicine, they need clean water, they need hand sanitizers. What we are doing now is we are going live on Facebook to give hope to people, and people don't just need hope right now. Yes, we need hope because we are dehumanized, we are scared, but we need water, we need food, we need sanitizers. I haven't seen, and maybe they are there, I haven't seen clergy engaging in humanitarian action right now. In the rest of the world, what religious leaders are doing, they are mobilizing their resources to give shelter to the homeless, to take food to those who do not have food, to give them hand sanitizers, to give them tissue, to give them, everything that would make them be able to beat this disease right now. And so when I look at that, and I see that there isn't anyone who is talking about the issues of the poor right now, what we need as a nation, I see no one holding the government to account. What I saw is the Evangelical Alliance issuing a statement, a written statement to condemn the arrest of pastors. And nobody is talking about their members, they are poor who are home and suffering and are scared. So I think of a theology of human flourishing as the ideal theology that every religious leader in this country should be thinking about, in honor of Bishop Ndingi Mwana Nzeki, and all the voices of our country that are no longer with us, those people who stood at the pulpit and spoke for everyone, spoke about ethnic violence as bad for everybody else, spoke about the importance of human life as God-given, and spoke about the dehumanizing conditions that Kenyans are living in, the corruption, the bad governance, the collapse of our hospitals. I wish the Kenyan clergy can think about a post-coronavirus theology of human flourishing for us to move forward.
Wow, I have nothing else to add from that. That's a brilliant ending. Yeah, we think that the Kenyan clergy should think about a post-coronavirus theology of human flourishing. Dr. Damaris Parsitau, thank you so much for joining me in this online interview in the times of Corona. Asante sana.
Asante, thank you so much, and keep safe, keep well. Praying for you.
Okay, you too. Be well, take care, and also take care of your family as well. Asante sana.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, be well. Okay.